Muslims from emigrating to Denmark. I'm guessing at that, but I think that's the case. And so all of Europe has this religious problem, basically, is what it is. And the Muslims are pushing the issue, and it can't avoid not becoming a conflict.
All right. I have Dr. Bill Veith in Austin. Hello, Bill.
You.
Hi.
Good. Listen, hi, Robbie, and hi, Bob. I wanted to call in and comment on the gentleman that called in from Canada to dispel the myths. And he had mentioned that it's a myth that gold, I think he said gold eagles weren't available. And, you know, the problem is when people report the availability of gold and silver, they're giving incomplete information because every ounce of gold and silver in the world is available at some price. It just depends on the price. So what people need to report is it's not available maybe at the spot price, but if somebody were able to, willing to buy silver at $20 or $30 an ounce, probably every ounce in the world would be available tomorrow.
Yeah,
so,
but that wasn't the point. Was that the Mint announced it's not that there's a shortage right now of gold and silver eagles. It's just the Mint has once again announced it's suspending production until it can find blanks.
Right, but what I'm saying is at the right price, there wouldn't even be a problem with that.
Oh, sure.
In other words, I own silver, and I've never sold an ounce of it, but at the right price, I would make every ounce available tomorrow.
Oh, sure.
So it's kind of ridiculous for people to say that something is not available. It may not be available in a certain price range, but at the right price, everything is available.
Yeah,
okay, and the other thing that kind of drives me crazy are when people discussing the gold and silver price of the future, when they say something like, I'm saying that gold will go to $1,200 an ounce or $1,500 an ounce. Well, do they mean 50 years from now or 10 years from now, next year or next month? So that means nothing to predict a future price of gold or silver without giving the time frame that you're making that prediction in.
By the way, Bill?
Yes.
Did you fully recover from the July 4th whiplash that you received trying to watch two different fireworks displays on the 4th?
I did. I'm fully recovered.
You're fully recovered. Well, I appreciate that. And your lovely wife, Christine, and my wife, Sandra, we all went out on the 4th out at Dell Diamond here in Round Rock, Texas, to go watch fireworks.
First time I've done that in years.
Isn't it amazing? I'm trying to get you back into the matrix a little bit so you can enjoy life again, Bill.
There we go. Well, thank you. Anyway, those were my only two comments.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks a lot, Bill.
Okay, bye-bye.
All right. Bob, in your newsletter, boy, somebody that I could imagine the shock that nobody has ever heard of Bob Chapman or read the International Forecaster could be knocked right on their tush here by reading some of the information. The first page in your newsletter, talking about the deficits and the dollary and treasure runs, and we just had a treasury auction here of $19 billion of 10-year notes, which, by the way, the madman Kramer has called upon the Treasury Department to issue 30-year 5% bonds. I don't think that's going to happen. These 10-year notes was at the yield of 3.365%, and that was to cover the 3.28 to 1, the highest ever ratio. And this was the third of 4 sales this week, totaling, folks. You don't think the government is desperate for money or desperate for people to buy their paper. The third of 4 of the sales this week alone, totaling $73 billion. Bob, they're running out of people to fund our debt.
Well, that's why they asked the Federal Reserve to purchase from them or in the market $300 billion worth of Treasury paper. And they have complied. Of course, it's a secret as to how much the Fed has already spent of that $300 billion. They're also, the Fed, at the same time, funding the purchase of Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and FHA paper, and at the same time, from banks, they are purchasing toxic waste, but they won't tell us what they're paying for it.
Right.
Now, the money that's going to the banks from the Fed, which incidentally, all that money is being made up out of thin air, that money that's going to the banks is going over to the Treasury to buy Treasury paper. And then they hold that on their books, so to speak. And so it's like a daisy chain. And so what is the fiscal deficit going to be this year beyond the revenue that they bring in? My guess is about $1 trillion, which means...
But it's a total of $2 trillion. Subtract what revenue they're hoping to bring in around the $1 trillion mark. That leaves a deficit of 2009 of $1 trillion or more.
And that's right. And I think that the Fed will end up buying probably somewhere between 700 and 800 billion in Treasury paper for money that they don't have. And they've already jacked up the numbers on the toxic waste as well as the agency securities. So I projected out from a previous 1.2 trillion that the Fed is going to create to a 1.6 trillion with the possibility of a 2 trillion. And I think we're going to be closer to 2 trillion. Now, mind you, listeners, that all of this money is being created out of thin air. Now, the money that goes to the Treasury and the money that goes to the agencies, Fannie, Freddie, et cetera, that money immediately becomes monetized. What's going to the banks because they're buying treasuries with it and holding on the books is not being monetized. And that's the biggest number, probably about 60% of the money. And so sooner or later, the banks are going to be called upon to lend more than they're lending now. Their lending's up about 1%, and in Europe, lending's up about 1.8%. And so once they start lending that money, that monetization will happen, and inflation will go crazy.
All right, we'll take the break here. Callers, hang on. We got you in queue. We'll roll your calls after this break. 800-313-9443. I didn't hear the number at the network ringing for donations.
How would you...
Bob, let me understand this. The Fed is buying these treasuries. I mean, we loaned the billions and billions and billions and billions and billions through the Fed Reserve to the banks. The banks are turning around and buying government treasuries. And we have real estate market that's getting ready to blow sky high. We have a continuing devaluing of property out there. And we've got $700 billion in commercial mortgages that are going to need to be refinanced before 2010. Folks, that's not too far away. We're already half a year into 2009. We're on the downhill side of that, coming to Christmas and Happy New Year. Bob, how long can they keep this going? I mean, there is no real credit available out there for people to refinance, to hang on to their existing homes. It is almost as if the banks want the foreclosures.
Well, I'm afraid you're right. Good, solid companies, privately and publicly owned, can't borrow money either. And they're cutting back on lines. They're doing away with whole lines for very viable firms. And there's a number of banks that are going under that are being absorbed by other banks that we don't even know about unless you live in the vicinity of where the bank operates. And they're gobbling up all these banks. They're using TARP funds to do that, incidentally. And so sooner or later, they're going to have to lend. And at what point, I don't know. You know, that's up for them to decide. But, you know, they have created almost $15 trillion in money and credit, most of which is in brokerage firms and in banks and insurance companies, making them solvent, so to speak. And I think that in time, as a last resort, they're going to have to allow the banks to lend, and the banks will begin to lend, but it'll be too late. Mm-hmm. And it's probably already too late now. They're not going to help the public. You know, 50% of the people who have loans right now that are coming up for reset over 10, 11, and 12, they're going to lose their homes maybe as much as 60%. You know, unemployment's going to continue to rise, not as rapidly as previously. We should have, we're 20.5% right now on U6. We should have 20 to 25 by the end of the year. It'll probably remain static around 25 next year because of the stimulus funds, although they may pass another stimulus action, which would take place sometime around mid-next year, perhaps $2 trillion this time. And incidentally, in January, we predicted all of this.